One night, in a small town in the American South, a family was quietly preparing to end their day. Those were peaceful times, uneventful. No one imagined that this modest house, with its time-worn walls and a forgotten altar in the corner of the dining room, would become the setting for something that would change their history forever. It was the youngest daughter who noticed something strange as she walked down the hallway. A flickering light, as if a candle were flickering even though none were lit. At first, they thought it was a power failure, but the mother instinctively stopped in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary, hanging by the front door. Her expression seemed different, her eyes brighter. As she approached, something made her step back. A drop was slowly falling from the statue's face, like a living tear. She thought she was tired, that her eyes were deceiving her. She called her husband. He saw it too. Then her children. No one could explain it. They lit candles, prayed a Hail Mary, and sat in silence, unsure how to react. The atmosphere in the house changed, an intense peace, yet at the same time an inexplicable gravity, as if a silent warning were being spoken without words. That same night, they all dreamed of the same scene. The Virgin standing in front of the house with a soft light on her face and an inner voice saying, "This home was chosen for awakening." At dawn, neighbors began to pass by. An elderly woman, upon seeing the image, fell to her knees. Another neighbor said that, since he was a child, he had never felt anything so powerful upon entering a house. The news spread. Within a few days, people from distant places began arriving. Some to pray, others out of curiosity. Many left transformed. No one returned the same. One of the visitors, a young man who had abandoned the faith years before, testified to having felt a maternal embrace that devastated him inside. Another, a man hardened by the loss of his wife, claimed to have heard silently a voice inside him saying, "I am still with you." The house became an impromptu pilgrimage site. There were no moving images, no speeches, no scandalous miracles. Only an image of the Virgin Mary who wordlessly wept. Days passed. The family, previously distant from the faith, began praying the rosary daily. The father, who had never confessed, sought out a priest. The mother began organizing prayer sessions with the women in the neighborhood. The children, who had previously spent hours on their cell phones, now sat in silence at the makeshift altar. A local journalist covering the story wrote, "There is no spectacle. There is no proof for the unbelievers. But there is a presence, and that presence changes the hearts of those who enter." The diocese was informed, an investigation was launched, and although nothing was officially declared supernatural, what happened in that house could neither be explained nor denied. Sometime later, the tears ceased. The image remained there, serene, as if its mission had been fulfilled. But something had changed forever, not in the statue, not in the walls, but in the souls who inhabited that place. And the most striking thing is that this visit, according to some mystical revelations, was not an isolated incident. The Virgin would visit homes all over the world, not always with visible tears, not always with lights or dreams, but with a clear intention to prepare her loved ones, to awaken the sleeping, to strengthen the lukewarm. Many witnesses of similar phenomena have stated that these visits occur especially in homes where there is at least one person praying faithfully, places where, despite the chaos outside, a candle is lit, an Our Father is said, or a statue is held in devotion. It is there that the mother seems to pause, weep, speak to the heart, or simply remain silent, but present. In another country, a woman reported smelling an inexplicable scent while praying in her living room. Weeks later, her husband, who had been estranged from the faith for decades, asked to join her for the rosary. In another city, a teenager claimed to have seen the silhouette of a woman dressed in white during a stormy night. He thought it was his imagination. The next day, as he recounted what had happened, his grandmother showed him an old image of Our Lady of Lourdes. He recognized her instantly. Is the Virgin Mary walking among us? Is she entering our homes unnoticed? Are we attentive to her visits, or so distracted by the noise of the world that we have stopped perceiving the signs? Perhaps while we sleep, while we argue, while we live as if nothing eternal were at stake. She is there, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting for someone to light a candle and say, "Welcome, Mother." This isn't about superstition or fanaticism. It's about a maternal call, silent, urgent. A call that doesn't seek to cause fear, but rather to awaken love. The question isn't whether it happened in a distant house. The real question is, what if that visit is also coming to your home? Do you believe the Virgin Mary can visit homes today, as she did in this story? Tell us below if you've ever felt her presence or received a sign in your home. Write, "I open my home to the Virgin Mary," if you wish for her to visit you. And if you know someone who needs this message, share this video right now. Amid the roar of bombs, the sound of screams and absolute chaos, an object as small as it was forgotten became the boundary between life and death for an entire family. It was 1999, during the bombings in Kosovo, when the Dragovic family, sheltering in a remote village, clung to the only symbol they still had. An old rosary inherited from their grandmother, blackened by time, but intact. That night, as planes flew overhead and explosions lit up the skies like lightning bolts of judgment, the Dragovic home remained standing. All the surrounding buildings were reduced to rubble. Later accounts from survivors included a harrowing detail. A Marian figure appeared in the midst of the fire, protecting the home. It wasn't the first time such a miracle was reported. In Latin America, following the 2007 Pisco earthquake in Peru, several destroyed homes shared an anomaly. Religious images, especially plaster crucifixes and Virgin Marys, remained intact amid collapsed walls and ceilings. A Marian image, covered in dust but without a single crack, was found among the rubble of an orphanage. The director, through tears, confessed that she had prayed with the children around the statue just minutes before the earthquake. None of the children were injured. The stories multiply. In the Philippines, after Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, rescue teams found areas completely devastated, except for a makeshift chapel where the rosary was being celebrated. Residents who had taken shelter there reported that during the worst of the storm, they felt an inexplicable, luminous presence covering the place. The image hanging from the altar, a simple cardboard virgin, didn't move an inch, despite the winds that uprooted roofs and trees. This pattern has been documented by scholars of the Marian phenomenon, who caution that it is neither superstition nor coincidence. The seemingly insignificant, a crucifix hanging on a wall, a rosary abandoned in a drawer, a small bottle of holy water forgotten on a shelf, can be the invisible line between disaster and salvation. The small, the despised by many, the things that cost nothing but are imbued with faith, become channels of protection. A little-known World War II report tells how Italian soldiers, besieged in a monastery, were protected by an image of the Virgin Mary they had brought with them. According to their memoirs, a bomb fell directly on the roof and failed to explode. Later technicians found no explanation. The detonation mechanism was intact. "Mary stopped it," one lieutenant wrote with conviction in his diary. Even today, with technology and skepticism reigning, stories continue to emerge. A family in Ukraine, displaced by the 2022 bombings, recounted how their grandmother insisted on carrying a bottle of holy water with her. When their vehicle was hit by shrapnel, only the windows were broken. The interior remained intact. Miraculously, so was the holy water bottle. This isn't magic, it's about active faith embodied in something concrete. The object alone doesn't work the miracle. It's the faith of the person carrying it, the cry of the person embracing it, the heart that begs for protection. In times of apostasy, when many ridicule these signs, heaven seems to continue to act through them. And each story seems to repeat the same question. Are you carrying with you what can save you? The Catechism of the Church teaches that sacramentals, such as holy water, the scapula, the crucifix, are not amulets, but sacred signs. They prepare a person to receive grace and dispose the heart to cooperate with it. They are channels through which God acts in his sovereignty when he encounters humble faith. And it is this humility that shines through in all the stories. No one was trying to manipulate the divine. There was only trust, a simple faith, like that of a child. And that faith was responded to with power, as if heaven were looking for any pretext to act, as if a simple rosary were enough to stop the darkness. What if that's what you're missing? Do you have one of these objects of faith in your home? Tell us if you've ever felt divine protection for something small you carried with you. Leave your message of hope for those who still doubt, and share this video with 3 people who need to believe again. In a small village in southern Italy, in the spring of 1997, a peasant family discovered something that would change the course of their days forever. The youngest daughter, Clara, barely 8 years old, was the first to notice the letters. They were on the dining room wall, carved irregularly, as if drawn with a flame. It read, "Trust, she will come." At first, the father thought it was a neighbor's trick. But what was most striking was that when they tried to paint the wall to cover up the message, it reappeared behind the new coat of paint. There was no technical explanation, and not even the parish priest could deny the obvious. That message remained for months, until one day it disappeared without a trace. Weeks later, Clara became seriously ill, and during her recovery, the girl said she had seen a woman dressed in light next to that wall. This is not an isolated case. Similar manifestations have been reported in various parts of the world. In Argentina, a woman named Susana claimed to have seen an inscription on her bathroom mirror during a sleepless night. "Pray, time is short," the message read, written as if water vapor had traced it. Curiously, the message remained even without moisture in the air, and only disappeared after Susana agreed to confess and return to the church after years of estrangement. Her story was reported by a local media outlet and accompanied by the testimony of the priest who received her. Elsewhere on the planet, in the Philippines, an entire family testified before religious authorities about an image that slowly formed on their living room wall. At first, it looked like moisture. Then, as the days passed, it took the form of a female face with closed eyes and tears. Although the church made no official statement, the phenomenon attracted faithful pilgrims and curious onlookers, many of whom reported feeling profound peace while praying there. According to accounts, an elderly woman who touched the wall was cured of a lung disease she had suffered for years. The house was transformed into a small oratory. Some experts in mystical theology suggest that these messages could be related to what is known as prophetic writing, an ancient phenomenon where God or his messengers allow words or signs to appear without human intervention. Although there is no theological consensus on the authenticity of each case or on their supernatural origin, many of these stories share a common pattern. They arise in times of crisis, call for prayer, and are almost always associated with the figure of Mary. In 2019, in a rural community in Mexico, a young man named Tomas photographed an image that appeared on the fresh plaster of an adobe wall in his home. The face of a woman, serene and sad, was clearly outlined. Neighbors began to visit, and one of them, a 56-year-old bricklayer, claimed that upon touching the image, he received an inner vision, a voice telling him to prepare for something that would come in less than 3 years. Months later, that community suffered one of the worst storms in its history, but the house where the face had appeared remained intact. Today, the wall still stands, covered with protective glass, and is a place of prayer. Some believe these manifestations are frauds, the product of suggestion, or even optical illusions. However, the disturbing thing is that they often occur in contexts where there is no economic motivation or fame. and most disconcerting. In several cases, the message seems to contain a warning or a promise of comfort. Most of the inscriptions relate to difficult times, calls to repentance, or phrases that recall Mary's maternal presence. "You are not alone. I am here. Return to my son." In Rome, there is a known testimony from a nun who, in the 1980s, found a message carved into her cell wall that read, "Pray for those who do not believe." Curiously, although the stone was hard and smooth, the inscription had depth, as if it had been carved with a tool impossible to handle without noise or leaving a trace. The entire community witnessed this event. Years later, that same community was protected from a forest fire that devastated the region. The flames stopped right at the edge of the convent. In France, in 2006, a group of young people at a retirement home discovered a word written in what appeared to be ash on a wooden door. It read, "Merciful." Although they cleaned it several times, the word kept reappearing. The young people decided to consecrate the home to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and since then it has become a place of inner healing for many. A local priest stated that the word was a response to the silent cries of several souls suffering from depression and anxiety. In Brazil, an even more recent case caused a stir on social media. A family from the interior of the state of Minas Gerais filmed a cross that appeared on their bedroom wall after a dream shared by two members of the household. Both reported seeing a woman dressed in blue who was crying silently while pointing at the wall. The cross remained for weeks and then disappeared. The case divided opinions, but many faithful in the region began to pray daily at that spot. The most intriguing thing about these stories is the sense of urgency they convey. They aren't just symbols or pretty phrases, they're warnings, messages that are printed in common places, that disrupt routine, that shake the soul. Why would they appear right now, in so many different places, with the same tone of spiritual urgency? Are they marking homes before a great storm, spiritual or even physical? Now, it's your turn. Do you believe these messages are real? Have you ever seen anything similar? Tell us in the comments if you've ever felt heaven spoke to you in an unexpected way, perhaps through a wall, a mirror, or a sign you couldn't explain. In ancient times, prophets warned people that certain places would be preserved and others devastated. The Holy Scriptures and the stories of mystical saints speak of zones of light and zones of shadow. But these aren't simply geographical coordinates. They are spiritual realities manifested in the invisible. What many people don't know is that our homes can also be part of that hidden map that heaven watches closely. Some homes are living signs of God's love. Others, sadly, become open doors to judgment. How do you know which zone your home is in? The great Marian apparitions offer us clues. At La Salette, the Virgin Mary warned that houses will be visited by calamities if they do not convert. At Fatima, the call was clear: prayer, penance, and consecration to prevent a second war worse than the first. And in Akita, the Virgin's tears seemed to fall not on temples, but on homes indifferent to heavenly messages. The geography of faith is not only territorial, it is familial. Where there is faith, there is light. Where there is rejection, blasphemy, or occult practices, darkness sets in and calls for punishment. Imagine two houses on the same street. In one, the rosary is prayed as a family. There is an image of the Virgin Mary, the water is blessed, and the entrance is anointed with faith. The children know the name of Jesus, and the parents strive to live according to the commandments. In the other, obscene music is played at full volume. Spiritualism is practiced, or people play with forbidden board games. Blasphemy is practiced. The existence of God is denied, and faith is mocked. Although they appear to be the same on the outside, spiritually they belong to opposite maps. One is a zone of grace. The other, unwittingly, has become a zone of judgment. The rosary has a special power as a protective shield. Our Lady explicitly stated this in numerous messages. With this prayer, you will overcome evil. Many testimonies indicate that during wars, earthquakes, and storms, the houses where prayer was prayed with faith were mysteriously preserved. In Hiroshima, for example, a residence near the epicenter of the atomic bomb remained intact. The reason? It was the home of priests who lived consecrated to the Immaculate Heart. That house was marked by heaven as a refuge. In addition to the rosary, the enthronement of the Sacred Heart of Jesus in homes was a constant recommendation of the saints. Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, upon receiving revelations from the heart of Jesus, passed on this promise: "I will bless the houses in which the image of my heart is displayed and honored." This blessing is not a metaphor. It is a real spiritual covering, perceptible even by those who do not profess the faith. When a house is consecrated, something changes. There is peace, there is order, there is discernment. Even when there are trials, evil has no lasting authority. On the contrary, there are homes where chaos reigns, with constant illness, confusion among family members, and chronic sadness with no logical explanation. These homes are not necessarily under a curse, but they are often under the influence of forces contrary to God. The use of esoteric objects, pagan figures, paintings that exalt darkness or sensuality, or simply the total absence of prayer, opens spiritual gaps that can affect the atmosphere of the home. Mary wept in Akita for such homes. This isn't superstition, but rather a spiritual interpretation of the environment in which we live. When the angels of the Lord pass over a city, they look for homes where the sign of the Lamb is present. The same thing happened in Egypt, when the angel of death didn't enter the houses that had blood on the doorposts. Today, we don't use physical blood, but we can spiritually seal our homes through faith, prayer, and purity of life. Mary's tears don't fall aimlessly. They mark homes that must awaken. The hidden map is not a physical plane, but a spiritual network that covers the world. There are houses where the Virgin Mary enters and remains. There are others from which she is expelled by sin. Some have been visited with signs: a weeping image, a candle that does not go out, a prophetic word given in prayer. Others have manifested the opposite: unexplained noises, shadows, constant physical ailments. The discernment is clear. Jesus said, "By their fruits you will know them." A house in the zone of grace produces fruits of peace, forgiveness, and conversion. A house in the zone of judgment, even unwittingly, repels grace. Therefore, it's not enough to have religious objects on the walls. Love for God must live in those who live there. It's not enough to avoid evil. It's necessary to actively practice good. Our Lady promised that homes where her call is heeded will be refuges during difficult times. And how do you know if heaven has marked your home as a zone of grace? Ask yourself, is there daily prayer? Does respect reign? Is Jesus invited into every family decision? Is the spiritual environment nurtured, or is the world allowed to enter with its confusion? This is the time to purify our dwellings, to consecrate them, to undergo a profound spiritual renewal. Judgment will not begin with the palaces, but with the homes. The hidden map is already being drawn from heaven. Some homes shine like beacons, others slowly fade into the darkness of indifference. And do you already know which zone your home is in? Do you think your home is a spiritual refuge, or does it still need to be marked by heaven? Comment below what signs you've perceived, and leave a prayer for families who need to return to God. In the darkest moments of history, heaven has not remained silent. The Virgin Mary, vigilant mother and messenger of the Almighty, has chosen simple places, humble people, and dramatic circumstances to communicate her messages. Over the decades, in various approved apparitions and private revelations that enjoy pious belief, she has left clear clues about what was to come and how to prepare. It is not grand strategies or human plans that will save souls in decisive days, but profound gestures of faith, sometimes almost hidden, but powerful as invisible shields. Among her many recommendations, there are 3 that resonate with special urgency, as if they were spiritual markers in the midst of a countdown that has already begun. The first of these signs is the scapular of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. It was given by the Virgin Mary herself to St. Simon Stock in 1251, with the promise that whoever dies with it will not suffer eternal fire. But beyond this promise linked to eternal salvation, many mystics have affirmed that the scapular acts as a spiritual garment of protection in times of great tribulation. In the apparition of Garabandal, for example, the need to carry blessed sacramentals is emphasized, and the scapula is one of the oldest and most powerful. During wars and earthquakes, there are stories of people who emerged unharmed when others perished, and upon checking their belongings, they wore their scapula with faith. This is not magic or superstition. It is a symbol of consecration to Mary, and in the days when the forces of evil intensify, being under her mantle will be a matter of spiritual life or death. The second thing she has insisted on keeping at home is a blessed candle. Various private revelations speak of a time of total darkness, a warning that will be accompanied by inexplicable phenomena in the sky and a spiritual silence that will cover the earth. At that time, according to prophecies transmitted by saints such as Blessed Gaspar del Bufalo and Padre Pio, the only lights that will remain lit will be blessed candles. In Nikita, Our Lady spoke of the fire that will fall from heaven, and in Trefontaine, Italy, she warned of a great purification that would begin in the homes. Having a blessed candle is not a simple devotional gesture, but a concrete preparation for when the world enters into darkness, not only physical, but moral. Many faithful already keep them in their homes, along with matches, the rosary, and holy water. Because when science falls silent and the satellites fail to respond, the humble glow of a blessed candle will be like a beacon of faith in the midst of chaos. The third recommendation, repeated in various Marian messages, is to have the Bible open to a specific psalm, Psalm 91. This passage, known as the Psalm of Refuge, has been cited by saints and visionaries as a spiritual strength against the attack of evil. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty, says the first verse. At Fatima, Our Lady insisted on prayer, sacrifice, and a return to the Word of God. Many modern mystics have recounted visions where homes marked with signs of faith, a cross, an image of Mary, a Bible open to Psalm 91, were preserved from plagues, earthquakes, or invasions. These testimonies agree on one thing: it is not the physical object that protects, but living faith and obedience to the Word. However, having it open, reading it frequently, proclaiming it aloud, and making it part of daily life becomes an act of resistance against a world that has forgotten its Creator. These 3 things, the scapula, the blessed candle, and the Bible in Psalm 91, seem simple, but they are filled with a spiritual power beyond human understanding. It's not about accumulating objects like someone stockpiling supplies out of fear, but about surrounding oneself with visible signs of a living, breathing, and protective faith. In times where confusion has multiplied, where families face ever more aggressive pressure against their values, where domestic altars have been replaced by screens, the Virgin insistently calls us to return to the essential. She doesn't impose, but warns. She doesn't threaten, but cries out. And her messages are repeated like echoes of a heavenly drum. Prepare yourselves, there is still time. People who have welcomed these signs into their homes often report an inexplicable peace, a serenity that surpasses all psychological analysis. Houses marked by prayer, faith, and obedience become, according to some revelations, zones of light, spiritual islands that will withstand the onslaught of the warning and the subsequent punishment. Places where the angels will camp, where darkness cannot enter. But faith cannot be improvised in the storm. That's why Our Lady insists on preparing beforehand. Like a mother who knows night is coming, she indicates what should be in every home. Not because it's superstitious, but because she knows the weight of evil and the power of good when expressed in concrete actions. After more than 2,000 years guiding the church, Mary continues to speak. And those who have heard her please know, every time she asks for something, it is out of love, but also out of urgency. What is to come will be difficult, but those who prepare will endure. The protection she offers is available, but not forced. It only enters the homes that welcome her. Do you already have these 3 things in your home? Tell us in the comments which of them are already part of your life and which one you're going to look for today. And you? Are you marking your home with faith or waiting for the storm to knock first? There are stories that are not forgotten. Stories that, even as the years pass, continue to stir the soul as the first time they were told. This is what happened in a small community in Latin America, when a pilgrim image of the Virgin Mary was carried in procession through the streets of a poor neighborhood. Accompanied by prayers, simple songs, and sincere devotion, the image was welcomed with flowers, white handkerchiefs, and tears of faith by the neighbors. But what no one expected was that upon arriving in front of certain houses, the image would begin to shed visible tears. Not once, not twice, but in front of specific houses. Tears that ran down the Virgin's face, as if her heart was speaking without words. Witnesses still remember the silence that fell. The prayers ceased instinctively. The wind seemed to stop. No one dared to speak. Why was she crying right there? What did she mean by that silent but profoundly eloquent cry? In some of those homes lived people far from the faith. In others, families amidst deep divisions, incurable illnesses, or hidden secrets that not even the neighbors imagined. But there was also a detail that many highlighted. In front of homes where the rosary was prayed, where a cross was visible, or where forgiveness reigned, the image did not weep. She passed in peace. Coincidence or a sign? Those who organized the pilgrimage tried to maintain respect. No judgments were made, no hasty conclusions were drawn. But something changed in everyone who saw it. The streets where the Virgin passed were no longer the same. Some neighbors began to pray together for the first time. Others approached the neighborhood priest for confession after decades of spiritual silence. There were those who felt that the Virgin was weeping not only for the pain she saw, but also for the urgency of a time that was shortening, as if each tear shed was a last attempt from heaven to touch hardened hearts. The Church, prudently, never rushes to judgment on such phenomena, but what no one can deny is the spiritual fruit left by a Marian visit. When she passes by, the soul is stirred, and if she also weeps, she is saying something. In the Bible, weeping always precedes change. Peter's weeping after denying Christ, Jesus weeping at the tomb of Lazarus, Mary Magdalene's weeping upon discovering the empty tomb. Mary's tears, then, cannot be superficial. They are messages without words, warnings spoken from the heart, doors that open only to those who wish to see. In many similar testimonies, the Virgin Mary seems to pause in front of certain houses as if choosing them. They are not always the most ornate. Not necessarily those with the greatest apparent faith. Sometimes they are wounded, needy, on the verge of collapse. It's as if the mother knew exactly where to leave her consolation or her warning. Some families have recounted that, after a visit from a weeping image, they began to experience profound transformations. A son returned home, an addiction abandoned, an unexpected reconciliation. Others, however, ignored it, and the void that remained was even more painful. But there's something that unites all these stories. The feeling that this wasn't a random event, that Our Lady doesn't walk aimlessly, that every tear is an intercession for a soul, a family, a story that can still be redeemed. Those who lived through it say it was as if the sky had descended for an instant, as if she herself wanted to say, "I'm here, but I won't be here forever." An urgent message, yet full of tenderness. a final call before the close of the time of mercy. And so, this phenomenon is repeated in different parts of the world, in the Philippines, in Italy, in Argentina, in Nigeria, always in simple neighborhoods, always with the same signs: silence, prayer, and a presence that cannot be explained with words. Tears, then, are not just an emotion, they are a declaration from heaven and perhaps a final call. And you? Would you be prepared if she passed in front of your house? Do you have a visible cross in your home? Have you ever felt the Virgin Mary wanted to tell you something directly? Your testimony can touch others. Write, "I believe in the tears of Mary," if you have ever felt her presence. In a small village surrounded by silent mountains, an event marked the memory of the elders who still whisper it as a warning. In the spring of 1992, an image of the Virgin Mary, located on the altar of an old chapel, began to shed tears without explanation. The phenomenon attracted dozens of curious onlookers, including journalists, pilgrims, and skeptics. A group of young people from the village, incredulous, mocked the event. One of them, in a defiant gesture, wrote with charcoal on the door of the church, "If she cries, let her put out the fire." 3 days later, a fire with no apparent cause consumed the house where he lived. The family survived, but the house disappeared into the ashes. The local priest, recalling the episode, did not do so with a tone of condemnation, but with profound sadness. "We didn't listen, and we paid for it." This type of account is not unique. In different parts of the world, similar cases have been recorded by the faithful and researchers of religious phenomena. In Fatima, before the Great Apparition of October 1917, some families reported seeing a flash that did not come from the sky. Most remained silent or ridiculed. Only those who maintained a respectful silence and devoted themselves to prayer participated weeks later in the miracle of the sun. In contrast, according to accounts preserved in the oral tradition of the region, a house near the site of the apparition, whose matriarch had said that not even God interfered in her life, was destroyed by an unexpected landslide following heavy rains. More recently, in 2011, a statue of Our Lady of Sorrows in a Central American residence began to show signs of darkening on its face, as if stained with blood. A neighbor laughingly said that the image was rusting. That same week, an earthquake shook the city. Her house was one of the few to suffer deep cracks in its structure, and she had to leave immediately with her children. In a later interview, she tearfully recounted, "She tried to warn me, and I laughed." These episodes, even when not officially recorded, remain as spiritual scars for those who survived. These are not immediate punishments, but rather spiritual consequences linked to a growing insensitivity to heaven's signs. In times when everything becomes a source of sarcasm, even the sacred seems to be the object of mockery. However, there is a very fine line between healthy skepticism and prideful contempt. And when that line is crossed, only God's silence remains. The prophecies of La Salette already warned about this kind of spiritual blindness. Melanie, one of the visionaries, stated that when men tire of mocking the cross, it will fall upon them like a stone of judgment. And so it seems to happen in cycles. In Kibeho, Rwanda, before the genocide, young visionaries reported apparitions of the Virgin Mary asking for prayer and penance. Some schools ignored the warnings. A few months later, several of them were turned into massacre camps. In one of the classrooms, where one of the visionaries reported feeling a heavy presence, dozens were executed. History shows us that when heaven speaks, it does so not out of vanity, but out of mercy. Most of Mary's messages in her apparitions do not bring threats, but warnings. She is a mother, not a judge. And as a mother, she weeps as she sees her children walking toward destruction. However, there are those who not only ignore but also desecrate, and that has consequences. In several apparitions, such as in Akita, heaven makes it clear that humankind's response to heavenly signs defines the course of events. "The sword of justice is about to fall," said Sister Agnes, quoting Our Lady's words. "This is not an arbitrary punishment, but a spiritual response to human contempt. There are also symbolic cases. Spiritual houses, such as churches or communities, that rejected prayer, penance, or the Marian presence. How many temples were closed after scorning what heaven asked? How many dioceses fell into scandal after silencing the warnings of inconvenient prophets? What seems merely historical or political may have much deeper roots, spiritual, and perhaps, precisely because we have lost that supernatural vision, we fail to perceive that judgment has already begun. If we look closely, we'll see that the places that most mock the sacred are also those that most lose the meaning of life, of family, of hope. On the other hand, humble, even poor houses, but which keep an image of Mary, where the rosary is prayed, where the name of God is respected, these endure. Winds come, rains fall, but they remain. This is not superstition, it is a promise. A house built on rock does not fall, said Jesus. And here the uncomfortable question arises. Are we too ignoring the signs? Are we listening to the mother's call, or are we, with our indifference, writing the script for future ruins? The tears flowing from so many Marian images may be heaven's last effort to stop us before the abyss. History shows those who listened survived, those who mocked gathered belated tears. Now I ask you, have you ever felt like heaven gave you a sign and you didn't listen? Tell us in the comments. Perhaps your story will help others open their eyes before it's too late. In some homes, there is a room where the air seems thicker. It's not a matter of design or ventilation, it's the spiritual atmosphere that has changed. It's a room where prayer is no longer heard, where silence is no longer sacred, where tears are no longer shed in repentance, but in solitude. In that corner of the home, the Virgin Mary no longer enters. And not because she doesn't want to, but because she has been rejected, expelled by the atmosphere that has been created there. The metaphor is powerful, but the reality even more so. How many homes retain a space where God is no longer welcome? Imagine a home where, years ago, the rosary was prayed as a family, where the cross hanging on the wall wasn't just decoration, but a living testimony of faith. But over time, that same space was transformed. First the prayer went, then the respect, then the peace. And in their place came screams that never turn off, vices hidden behind closed doors, anger, addictions, images that wound the soul. That room, once a domestic altar, became a zone forbidden to the sacred. It's not just about physical rooms, it's about the heart of the home, where what is seen, what is heard, what is said, what is accepted, is decided. There are homes where Mary has been denied entry not by words, but by custom, where conversations are filled with judgment, where pornography invades without resistance, where forgiveness never crosses the threshold. These environments are not just dark inside, they are rooms closed to grace. And yet Mary continues to call. She knocks softly, as at La Salette, as at Fatima, as at Akita. But her tears do not wet the thresholds of rooms that have been purposely sealed from heaven. Where a blessed candle would be unwelcome, where a crucifix would be mocked, where the music of worship would be interrupted by shouts or blasphemies, it is there that the Virgin stops and weeps. How many times has he tried to enter your home, not just the common room, but that room where you harbor resentment, where you hide what you don't want anyone to see? Sometimes the most luxurious place in the home is spiritually the poorest, because it's decorated on the outside, but contaminated on the inside. They are environments filled with anxiety, impurity, contempt, and insensitivity. Spaces where television has supplanted prayer, where social media has replaced conversation with God. And then an inevitable comparison arises. There are other rooms, simpler but full of light. They are rooms where a space has been reserved for the rosary, where the Bible is open to Psalm 91, where a small altar holds the image of Mary, who has been kissed so many times with love. They are rooms of prayer, places where, upon entering, one feels a distinct peace, not because they are magical, but because they have been consecrated day after day by the presence of heaven. The difference isn't architectural, it's spiritual. What is the dominant atmosphere in your home? Resentment, impurity, inner disorder, or faith, humility, and devotion? Some homes are decorated with sacred objects, but their inhabitants live as if God didn't exist. Others, though humble, are filled with angels, because there God is loved in secret. The Virgin does not force the door. She enters where she is welcomed, as in Elizabeth's house, as in the manger in Bethlehem, as in the upper room. But she withdraws where scandal, mockery, and spiritual blindness reign. There are houses where she no longer enters because she has been forgotten. Others, where she weeps at the door. But there is still time to open. If we were to examine our homes room by room today, which would be the most painful to show heaven? What spiritual room has been left in darkness, fueled by habits that wound the soul? Entire families are sick because a room in the house was given over to vice, adultery, or mutual contempt. And where love dies, grace does not remain. But there is hope. There always is. Because it only takes a few seconds of firm decision for the Virgin to re-enter. A confession, a renunciation, a candle lit with faith, a restored image, a simple but sincere prayer. And that room, which was once shadow, can once again become light. The enemy thrives on spiritual silence, but flees where there is intercession. This is an urgent call, because we're not just talking about physical environments, we're talking about spiritual protection. In a world where darkness is invading homes through television, cell phones, and culture, we need more than ever to rebuild sacred spaces. Mary is looking for homes where she can stay. Not just visit, stay. And the first step isn't complicated. It's called decision. A family that decides, even in the midst of its misery, to open a space for the Virgin Mary will see miracles. Because where Mary enters, Christ enters. And where Christ dwells, everything is transformed. And you? Have you already identified which room in your house needs to be purified? Leave it in the comments. Which room in your home needs God's light restored? Do you dare to make that space a place of prayer? Share this message with 3 people and write below, I open my house to heaven. In a small mountain village, battered by hurricane-force winds and endless rain, a candle remained lit for 3 days and 3 nights. The event was recorded by local residents, who testified that no draft, no matter how violent, managed to extinguish the flame burning before an image of the Virgin Mary. It was placed on a simple stone altar in a humble house whose family had consecrated their home to the Immaculate Heart of Mary weeks earlier. While other homes suffered power outages and property damage, this family remained praying, with that small flame as their only source of warmth and light. Similar cases have been reported in different countries. During a massive blackout in Manila, Philippines, a family claimed that a blessed candle, which they kept according to Marian tradition, remained lit for more than 72 hours without burning. The candle was next to a hanging rosary and an image of Our Lady of Fatima. Curiously, they said, all the other candles in the home burned out within a few hours. Only that one remained. Witnesses from the neighborhood came to see it, some with tears in their eyes, recognizing that the light was a sign from heaven. In Christian tradition, light has a profound meaning. The Gospel of Matthew presents the parable of the 10 virgins, where 5 were wise and 5 were foolish. The wise brought extra oil for their lamps, while the others, unprepared, did not. When the bridegroom arrived, only those with light were able to enter the banquet. The rest, trapped in darkness, were left out. This story is not just a moral warning, it is a prophetic key. Keeping the lamp lit means living in vigilance, prayer, and constant fidelity. Blessed candles have been recommended in multiple Marian messages, such as those of St. John Bosco, the Virgin Mary and St. Nicholas, and in some approved private revelations. In many of these messages, Mary invites her children to keep sacred objects, such as crucifixes, holy water, scapulars, and blessed candles in their homes, not as amulets, but as visible reminders of a consecrated, awakened, and protected life. A lit candle does not represent only a physical flame. It is the symbol of the soul, burning with love and obedience, even in the midst of darkness. In a Carmelite monastery in Spain, the sisters recount an event during the Civil War. When they were forced into hiding, one of the nuns managed to keep a small candle lit inside a cave for almost a week. No wind or humidity could extinguish it, and although it seemed humanly impossible, that flame was their consolation in the midst of fear. Upon returning to the convent, the first thing they did was light that same candle in front of the tabernacle. One of them wrote, "That light was the beat of our heart, the testimony that Mary had not abandoned us." Today, when many homes have lost the flame of faith, Our Lady calls us to light our inner lamps. It is not enough to light physical candles during external storms. The true storm is spiritual. It is the confusion, apathy, and disbelief that has taken hold of the world. A candle that does not go out is a soul that does not give in to discouragement. It is a heart that still believes, still prays, still hopes. Mary appears as a mother who seeks fervent hearts, like those small lighthouses that remain steadfast while the sea roars. The Virgin Mary has said in various messages that days of spiritual darkness will come, where only consecrated and prayerful homes will be refuges of light. At La Salette, for example, she spoke of the abandonment of God by many consecrated people and of heaven's silence in the face of the world's rebellion. At Akita, the message was even clearer. The only weapons that will remain will be the rosary and the sign left by my Son. And among those signs, many faithful recognize the blessed candle as a symbol of resistance. And you? Have you consecrated your home to the heart of Mary? Is your life a lit lamp or a wick about to go out? It's not just about having physical candles, but about cultivating a living faith, nourished every day by the word, prayer, and the sacraments. You can't improvise light when night falls. Either you're prepared or darkness envelops you. The wise virgins didn't trust themselves. They foresaw, they anticipated, and that is the attitude heaven expects of us. A light that never goes out is also one that comforts others. There are people who, without knowing it, are like candles for their families. Their silent prayer, their discreet example, their faithfulness in the hidden, are a constant flame in the midst of a world that grows cold. Perhaps you are one of those souls. Perhaps God has chosen you to keep the flame burning while others sleep. Faith is contagious. Just as one candle can light another, so too can one holy life awaken many others. In many exorcisms documented by expert priests, blessed candles are mentioned as disrupting the presence of evil, not because they have magical powers, but because they represent the presence of the sacred. On one occasion, a priest recounted that upon lighting a blessed candle during a case of spiritual oppression, the atmosphere changed completely. The light dissolved the tension. Prayer became more serene, and the face of the sufferer began to regain peace. The same thing happens in the invisible when you decide to keep your faith awake. Now that you've read this message, pause for a moment. Look around your home. Is there a blessed candle in your house? Is there an image of Mary? Is there an atmosphere of faith, prayer, and divine presence? Or on the contrary, has the darkness of the world invaded your most intimate spaces? Today, you can make a decision. Today, you can rekindle that flame that once went out, even if it seems small, even if it trembles in the wind. If it's true, it will not go out. Is your inner lamp still burning, or is it already burning out? Comment below if you've ever experienced a sign with a lit candle or if you want to consecrate your home to Mary. Write, "I want to keep my light burning," and share this message with someone who needs to rekindle theirs. The sky was covered with a thick layer of clouds, but it was no ordinary storm. There was no lightning, no wind, nor the typical warning that precedes climatic chaos. What descended that day was an unearthly silence, as thick as fog and as sharp as a blade. In a small town in southern Europe, neighbors stopped hearing the barking of dogs, the singing of birds, and even the ticking of clocks. No one knew why, but something inside each of them warned that this was no ordinary day. The church bells, programmed to ring every hour, remained motionless. The clock read 3 in the afternoon, but it was as if time had stopped along with the world's breathing. An elderly woman, noticing the strange atmosphere, leaned out onto her balcony and saw something that paralyzed her. The empty street. Not a single child playing, not a car passing by, not even the sound of a television on. The air seemed thicker, as if carrying an invisible message that penetrated every home without asking permission. And it was then that she remembered. Years before, during a pilgrimage to Fatima, a priest had whispered in her ear, "A day will come when heaven will no longer speak, and silence will be the warning." Some believed it was merely an atmospheric phenomenon, but those with an awakened soul felt something else. Absence. It wasn't just a lack of noise, but an absence of presence, as if something sacred had withdrawn, and with that came fear. Because when heaven is silent, it's a sign that it has already said all it had to say. Similar cases have been documented in other parts of the world. In Akita, Japan, during apparitions to Sister Agnes, Our Lady reportedly announced that a time would come when even prayers would not be enough to stave off the punishment. "If men do not repent," she said, "there will be a punishment worse than the flood." And most striking, days before certain tragedies, monks reported a sudden paralysis in the spiritual environment. Bells that did not ring, candles that did not light, sacred images that seemed to lose their luster. Let's return to the small town. Hours passed without a change in the atmosphere. A worried father entered his children's room and was surprised to find them in absolute silence, their eyes fixed on the image of the Virgin Mary on the wall. "Dad," said the youngest, "why did she leave?" The father didn't know what to answer, but that question was like a mirror reflecting what many were feeling. A presence that had always been there was now absent. In another home, a young mother, sensing the strange atmosphere, knelt before the crucifix and began to pray, not out of fear, but out of instinct, as if something inside her was saying, "If today is the end, I want to be found like this." Curiously, it was one of the few homes where, that afternoon, a candle lit itself, a phenomenon no one could explain, but one that would be repeated in other regions, isolated signs amid the general silence. The newspapers paid no attention, no media outlet reported it. But in Catholic forums and online prayer groups, testimonies began to emerge. People in different countries reported the same feeling, a kind of forced withdrawal, as if the world had been covered by an invisible tarp, preventing spiritual light from entering. "It seemed like mourning without a death," wrote one Spanish woman, "as if the spirit had taken a step back, waiting for our decision." Some theologians compared the phenomenon to what happened before Jesus' death. Scripture says, "There was darkness over all the land from noon until 3 in the afternoon. And then the veil of the temple was torn." That was more than an eclipse. It was a tear in the spiritual fabric of the world. And now, perhaps we are seeing a new veil close. The most disturbing thing is that in some homes, the silence brought not fear, but peace. They were homes where people prayed, where they fasted, where they forgave, where God's name was spoken with reverence, not mockery. In those places, the silence was not absence, but fullness, as if heaven itself had descended not to judge, but to dwell. Yet in other homes, that same silence was a cry that no one heard, but that wounded the soul. Homes marked by arguments, pornography, the idolatry of money, selfishness. Bedrooms where prayer was no longer practiced. Living rooms where the Bible gathered dust. Kitchens where food was served without gratitude. And then the question inevitably arose. What would this silence say about my home? Would it speak for or against? Today, some mystics believe that judgment is no longer something of the future, that we have entered a time of silent separation, not by the sword but by presence or absence. Heaven marks the day silently. Mary no longer appears as often, not because she has given up, but because she has already said everything. The rest is up to us. And so this day of mystery closes, not with thunder nor with fire, but with emptiness, an emptiness that can only be filled by a converted heart. A day where the birds don't sing, the children don't play, and the wind doesn't blow, because heaven is listening. And if all was silent today, what would speak in favor of your home? Right below a response that comes from the depths of your soul. What testimony would your home bear if judgment were to come tonight?